Every winter, I always enjoy picking up the book, The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder, to get a glimpse of what it was like back in the 1880s during the winter season. And I've always wondered how accurate the information in this book is. Well, there's somebody else who wondered that, and they did the work for me. I'd like to welcome Dr. Barbara Mays Boustead. She's actually a trainer at the National Weather Service, but she also did this work on the side because she was so fascinated by it. Thank you so much for joining us, Barb. It's great to see you. And I am just curious, tell us what made you decide to fact check this book?
Thanks for having me here. And what led me down this path was reading this book like it's comfort food in the tail end of a winter that I was just ready to be done with. And I'd done that for many years in my adulthood. These aren't just good books for kids, I suppose. And I got to thinking, as I always had been, like you did, how accurate was the weather described in her book? And then I sitting in my workstation at work, and I thought to myself, well, I'm a meteorologist and climatologist. I have tools in front of me. I can look these things up and start to see. So I started down the path of looking for data and then trying to get a grasp on how severe the winter was. And one research path led me to another through this book.
So, how difficult was it to do this research?
It isn't easy to find weather data from the 1880s. There is some. There are some sites in the central United States that have been taking long-term records since the 1870s, but they're pretty few and far between, and there aren't any in South Dakota. So I had those records at least to help me understand what happened around the region. But to get a little closer, we also had to dig in and find some old military forts records. You can also find newspaper clippings and just written descriptions, things that are excerpts from journals or town histories. So you cobble together a number of resources to come up with something of the answer to what that winter was like.
So, how long did it take you to find out these answers?
I'm still looking into it, and I started this probably 12 years ago um, because I continue to find new pieces of information to include or another question I want to answer that I have to go digging somewhere else to look.
So, the big question is there was a 60-year gap from when the events of the book took place to when the actual book was published. So, how accurate was her information?
That's a great question, and I'm going to step back to offer a little bit of context. The books that Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote, the Little House book series, many of us know it as, are historical fiction. She wrote them as fiction, not as a memoir. So there are some things in those books that are fictionalized. And they're based on her life story. So some of the things in them are actually very true as well. And there is a whole group of academics who are working to sort out those parts. What's the fiction and what's the truth or the historically accurate information in there. It turns out when she wrote the weather, she was pretty darn accurate. There were things she exaggerated or things she maybe put out of order from how they really happened. But by and large, she really got the details written quite accurately. And to think that she did it without being able to go look up on the internet to refresh her memory or even access weather data like we can now.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Now, a lot has changed in society, obviously, since the 1880s. How do we react to winter storms now compared to that time period?
That also is a really interesting question because you think about the pioneer life that they were living, where they were really forced to be pretty self-sufficient. You think, right? They have to raise the food that they eat. They have to find the fuel they're going to burn to warm their houses. But they were also very good at pooling things together as a community when times got tough, and in a way that it's really hard to imagine. Now, can you imagine everybody in your neighborhood during an ice storm or during a blizzard, putting all their food in the center of it and saying, okay, take what you need. Let's make sure every family has enough to eat. It's just hard to imagine in our current time. They were also a little bit better about not traveling once the winter set in. Really, people didn't go very far once the long winter was really set in, which is great because there weren't as many human casualties as you might have expected for how severe it was, at least not from exposure. Now we are not very good at stopping our lives and saying, okay, it's going to snow, there's going to be ice, I'm going to stay home. There's a mentality of we still have to get there that leads to people becoming exposed to the risks that the winter weather can bring. So I wouldn't say that they were more or less vulnerable. I think we are differently vulnerable and how we are exposed to risk and threats during these winter weather events.
So I know you've taken this information and you've actually presented it to fans of Laura Ingalls Wilder. Tell us how it was received.
There is actually a conference called Laura Palooza, and it sounds funny, but it's a real and academic thing. And it brings in scholars, it brings in Pulitzer Prize winning author and other authors who have written biographies or information about Laura Ingalls Wilder, and the folks who study her work. And I have given a lot of talks through the years. I've had the opportunity to present in a number of places, conferences and spotter talks and schools and teachers. And of all of the places I've ever presented, I can't remember a warmer and more intrigued audience than when I first presented to the Laura Palooza group. They really wanted to know more. They really wanted to dig deeper. They were hungry for that information that helps quantify what she went through, that puts a number to it or makes it relatable to them. So um, the wonderful folks with Laura Palooza and the others I've come in touch with through the years have really been supportive in not just being interested in the work, which makes you feel a little validated as a scientist, but asking questions that led me to new research to pursue.
Oh, interesting. So I just need to know one last thing quickly. Do you have any other plans to do other literary weather research?
I am still working through the whole Little House series. There is so much weather in those. When I get done with that, if I ever do, maybe I'll look to something next, but I don't have any ideas yet.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and now in our new Zoomiverse, we had the ability to. So I'm thrilled that we got to speak with you, and I'm thrilled that you've done this research for the rest of us. So thank you so much. And we'll be back in a moment with more.